There we go.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for coming through to the platform, Tiffany Markman. So I'm just gonna start with the first question, of the show. And you've built a career at the intersection of strategy, storytelling, and business growth. What originally drew you to the space, and what problem did you feel brands in Africa were failing to solve? But before you can just touch on that question. You can just tell us who you are, and what do you do specifically, and who is Tiffany Markman for people. Yes.
Thank you. I'm a writer and a trainer and a speaker. And I've spent the last 20 years helping people mostly to build intellectual confidence. So that's the thing that writing, training, and speaking has in common. It's intellectual confidence. And the final outcome of that process is for them to communicate with clarity and with power, whether it's verbally, in writing, in the way that they have conversations in the office, that kind of thing. And over the last 20 years, I've trained about 36,000 people, and I've worked for 717 brands in 16 countries. So that's just a little bit of a background on me. But in response to your question, you said, what drew me to the sweet spot between strategy, storytelling, and business growth? I would love to pretend that I was drawn to this career because I had identified a problem worth solving, but that is actually not what happened. That was just where my talents happened to be when I was 23. And luckily, it turned out to be the right space for me, but I didn't know at the time that that's what I was doing. So in retrospect, it looks very cool that, I have this career that is at the intersection of those three things. But 20 years ago, I didn't even know that strategy was a thing and business growth was not a priority for me. So I was drawn to the space because that's where my talents were. But what's kept me in the space is the fact that brands in Africa are not short on creativity, they're short on clarity. So it's not that they don't have the capacity for amazing creative ideas and the capacity for storytelling that builds businesses and revenue. It's the absence of hard thinking before the storytelling begins. And I think that's why I still do this, because brands in Africa often start with the story, but they should be starting with a strategy, with a desired outcome behind the story. And so that's why I try and push intellectual confidence. That's why that's my big thing, is getting brands to do all of that thinking before we start telling stories.
It's interesting. So you're mentioning branding and slogans, and so do you think that strategic positioning is still undervalued, in the African continent?
Point. It's not just African businesses, it's a lot of startups see branding as the logo or the slogan or the colors. And the reason people see branding and strategy and strategic branding as that is because those things are visible, right? So it's the first thing you see, they're tangible, they're productive. Whereas strategic positioning is often invisible. You can't photograph it, you can't launch it with a social media campaign. And another thing that happens in Africa, certainly in the companies that I work for, which range from startups and small businesses to medium-sized businesses to large businesses to global multinationals, strategic positioning means that you have to make uncomfortable trade-offs, because when you are thinking about strategic positioning for your business, you are thinking about hard questions like, who don't I serve? What work won't I chase? What revenue would I be willing to walk away from? What would I say no to? And that can feel very risky in founder-led businesses, particularly in Africa. So we tend to skip the strategic positioning and we go straight to the logo because it's easier.
Yeah, in Civilization and Its Discontents, Sigmund Freud, the founder of the book, argues that humans pursue happiness, um, you know, uh, pursue happiness even though civilization makes sustained happiness impossible. When you're talking about society, what society expects of you, and all that thinking, as a human, in your human's capacity, when you're thinking about your prefrontal cortex, which makes you think about the future of you wanting all these established things when you're seeing someone buying a car, etc. And you feel as if you as a person, you would want that specific object or whatever resource that you think it's valuable at that specific moment or specific time. And Sigmund Freud almost discusses this concept as, happiness as something that people seek, which is almost, how can I put this? It's almost in battle with what society expects of you, with everything that the society is, the way it's structured, when you're going to be talking about the laws, the policies, etc., the way everything is structured, it makes it impossible for you to pursue what you currently as a person designed to meet those desired tasks. And and I'm trying to create an analogy of this because I'm trying to put into this perspective of entrepreneurs and creators, of them becoming misfits in society, in a way that they're trying to almost escape this imposter syndrome. Because I almost saw your your speech that you made. I don't know, I think it was in sneaker suits. You mentioned the concepts of of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And you being in this world, and you're having this worldview that you're trying to have an impact, but also you're trying to escape what society expects of you. And it almost clashes as a person, because I also interviewed Sabin Takobong, one of the first interior black designers in Africa. And when I texted her before, when I wanted to interview her, she mentions that, I was so shocked that there's other people who are outside in this world, because when you're a creator or an entrepreneur, your mind is always fixated in trying to build certain things. And I don't know how do you view that as a person who's trying to escape the norm, if you know what I mean?
It's an interesting question for me because I'm a creative, because I work in writing, but I'm also a business person who is trying to survive. So I think many entrepreneurs are people who couldn't squeeze themselves into existing structures or systems without losing something quite essential to their creative personality. And so I think that entrepreneurship is a way that creators externalize that tension. That's why I believe so many creatives are self-employed or need to be self-employed. Because only if you're self-employed can you build a structure that reflects your values rather than work for a structure that suppresses your values. Now, I don't want to say that traditional jobs aren't valuable. I think they are, but I think there are certain kinds of people, the misfits, as you say, or the creatively expressive, who need their own rules. I always say to people that I've been self-employed for 21 years and now I'm unemployable because I cannot be told what to do. I could never get a normal job because no one must tell me what to do. I'm the boss, and if I'm not the boss, I don't want to play, right? And is there ego in that? Absolutely. I think some entrepreneurs, I think ego is good, but there's also agency in that because I don't want to be told what to do. I want to do my own thing. I'm the boss, my way or the highway, which is a lovely privilege as an entrepreneur. I talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. So yeah, I do speak about this a lot. I have a keynote talk that I've given at Suits and Sneakers and all over the world called Uninstalling Imposter Syndrome. And the thing is that I'm 45. I've been 45 for 5 days. And I can tell you that imposter syndrome never leaves you. I will never wake up and be entirely free of that voice in my head that says, Tiffany, you are shit. But what happens over time is that the voice gets softer and my own voice gets louder. So my advice to anyone watching this is don't wait to feel like the person you need to be. Just do and learn, and eventually your identity will catch up with your behavior.
How do you know it's the right voice that you're listening to? How do you know which one is the right voice?
The right voice is the one that says nice things to you. The wrong voice is the one that tells you that you're a fraud, that you don't know what you're doing, that you have no right to do these things or have these opportunities, that you should second guess yourself, that you're not worthy, that money is evil, and you can't, you shouldn't strive for money, you shouldn't hustle. It's the voice that tells you bad things about yourself. The voice that talks to you nicely and says you can, that's the voice you should listen to, because that's the good voice. The bad voice is the one on the shoulder that just says horrible things to you the whole time. I have a horrible name for him, but I don't want to say it on your show because I don't know if I'm allowed to.
Yeah, much of our daily lives are shaped by systems we don't, consciously choose, whether it's government policy, economic structure and social expectation, which raises a question about, free will. I remember there's this guy I was listening to, but I won't mention his name. And we're talking about this thing about I'm not gonna mention this conversation. Yeah. So you've spoken about leaving your job, at 24, free will, right? You talked about leaving your job at 24 previously in one of your interviews. Looking back, do you see that decisions as an act of privilege or personal agency? And how do you balance imposter syndrome with becoming the person you felt you needed to grow into?
So I had my dream job. I got my dream job when I finished my degree. It was just a matter of knowing the right person who needed someone like me at the right time. And I went straight into my perfect job in publishing when I was 22. And it was the best. I mean, I loved every single thing about that job, but I left when I was 24. And leaving was both privilege and agency, because I didn't have savings or generational wealth. I don't come from money. I'm the only child of a single working mom. But I did have the privilege of an excellent education that I was a scholarship kid, but I got a brilliant education from brilliant schools and an excellent university education that was bursary based. And I also had a small network of people who thought I was good. Plus, this was 2004 when I left my job. So I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a house. I didn't have anything that I needed to pay for. I was just like one little person. And so I had no sort of demanding expenses. And that at the time was a privilege. I could walk away from a job without too many negative consequences for a family or a husband or kids. But also, I mean, I feel it's only fair to say that I'm a white woman who grew up in the Johannesburg northern suburbs in the 80s. And that privilege is very real. So we didn't have money, but I have to be honest and say that a white woman in the 80s growing up in Sandton, there's privilege there. So yes, it was both privilege and agency. The agency side was, why did I leave this job that I loved so much? Because there were unethical business practices happening in this business that I loved, and I became aware of them, and I couldn't endorse them by staying. I felt like staying would be my endorsement of what was going on in the business. So I left. I had no job to go to. I had no freelance side hustle. Happily, it all worked out, but I didn't know at the time that it was going to work out. It was just luck and privilege. So the answer to your question is both agency and privilege.
Given your involvement in education, how do you think about the role of AI in learning systems today? Do you believe we underestimate the incentives that keep education systems slow to evolve, sometimes at the cost of individualism and creativity? And also, looking globally from China to emerging markets, do you see as expanding human potential or risking the erosion of creative thoughts? And where do you think the world is heading in the next few years as AI becomes embedded in education?
So let's take the first question first, which is the impact of AI on learning systems. I think that AI threatens traditional learning systems because it decentralizes expertise. So it democratizes who has access to wisdom. Now, whether or not you think AI generates wisdom is another debate for another episode, but let's just assume for now that it decentralizes expertise. But I also think that what AI does is it exposes how much traditional learning has been designed around compliance rather than thinking. So it's be able to recite the whole history of the French Revolution from the first date to the last date in order. That's not learning. That's just, I don't know, that's a parrot can do that, right? And so I think AI has sort of shattered that illusion to an extent. So I think that one of the reasons the education system is traditionally slow to evolve is because the people in charge of the education system are not at the front end of cutting edge technology. Cutting edge technology is terrifying. They don't really want things to change. They don't like change. There's a huge amount of power in control, which is how things are run at the moment. So that's my feeling. And I think that I don't think that AI is a threat to individualism and creativity. I think that bad education systems are a threat to individualism and creativity. I think that if anything, a shoddy education system will do more to undermine the potential of a young creative than anything else. I don't think we should blame AI for that. The other thing about AI is that it can either flatten creativity totally, right, and dilute the power of everything, or expand it. It really depends on how it's used. So I use AI to provoke better questions. I use it to ask myself better questions and to ask my clients better questions. And so it's a win for me. But over the next couple of years, I think the gap will widen between systems that teach students to think and systems that teach students to obey. And the latter will be the downfall of individualism and creativity, whereas I think the former will prove that we can live in a very happy world with AI if we use it properly.
I mean, I'm still also like shocked at how we're talking about why the curriculum hasn't been changed since the previous decade plus.
I was at school. Yeah, I was at school I matriculated in 1998. Were you even born yet? No. So I matriculated before you were born, right? And they are still teaching the business writing, business letter template now in 2026 that they were teaching in 1998. It has been 20 something years. We don't use letters anymore. Why are we teaching a business letter that has the address on the top right and the person's name on the left, and then you skip 2 lines? I don't understand why education just hasn't caught up with the world, and then we wonder why we produce kids who feel like they can't write properly in their first job. It's because we haven't updated the bloody curriculum since 1998.
Yeah, because I've read, well, I don't know if it's a person who's worked in the government for a long time, and he tweeted, he written a quote that said, ignorance is, the $1 billion industry. And what he means by that, I think he means that, business elites actually fund the government, the fund the educational system. That's why they will actually prefer their children to actually not be competing with, these young African leaders who are just coming up, these young African leaders who are needed to change a bit, maybe starts to, how can I put this, challenge the norm and the social structures. Because if you're hearing about what's happening in China, about young kids who are 10 years old learning about AI, learning about machine learnings and all these things, but why are we not starting ourselves and actually asking governments to actually provide us with funding and actually start creating? Because I was talking to Teboho Mashafile, one of the head of the chemical engineering departments in UGA, and she's mentioning about this thing about skills development and how kids needs to start using this waste to produce fuel, which is okay. It's business, right? But at the same time, kids are learning how to start incorporating different skill sets to bring themselves into the economy.
Yeah.
And if we're not going to be changing now, when are we going to be changing? And I think it's
we've already left it 25 years too late. We have to start yesterday. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. So we didn't do it 20 years ago. Let's get on it.
Yeah, it's really. But thank you so much for coming through to the interview. It was really a pleasure.
It was a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for your excellent questions.